Progress. So I think we'll start, and I'm sure other people will come. It's good to see some of you I haven't seen in a while. Marianne, welcome. I see you. Like Alfred Lord Tennyson has shown up. That's cool. I thought he was passed away though.
Hi, Tennyson.
Let's see. Welcome. Hey, James, go ahead and wind down when you're ready. Thank you, James, for playing for us. It's a wonderful thing. Welcome to Think Again tonight. So delighted to see so many of you here. Appreciate your willingness to share this time and thoughts and hopes about a really important subject. So thank you. So, we had music from James warming us up here. James, first time I saw James, he was doing that at Lower Lights, Thomas McConkey's Lower Lights. And I didn't know him then. And then we got to know each other better at Thomas McConkey Lower Light retreat, day-long retreat. So that was fun. And then I got to know him even better because he's a musician and my wife is a musician, and now they jam together sometimes. So it's been kind of fun, and get to know his fiance, Karen, who's assisting behind the veil over there on one side. So thank you. When I scheduled this, I did not realize it was going to be on Veterans Day. So I just really briefly want to play a very thoughtful short poem about Veterans Day. So let me know if you can't hear this. You should be able to.
This audio poem is a production of poetryfoundation.org.
Facing it. My black face fades, hiding inside the black granite. I said it wouldn't, damn it. No tears. I'm stone. I'm flesh. My clouded reflection eyes me like a bird of prey, the profile of night slanted against morning. I turn this way, the stone lets me go. I turn that way, I'm inside the Vietnam Veterans Memorial again, depending on the light to make a difference. I go down to 58,022 names, half expecting to find my own, and letters like smoke. I touch the name Andrew Johnson. I see the booby trap's white flash, name shimmer on a woman's blouse, but when she walks away, the name stay on the wall. Brushstrokes flash, a red bird's wings cutting across my stare, the sky, a plane in the sky, a white vet's image floats closer to me. Then his pale eyes look through mine. I'm a wonder. He's lost his right arm inside the stone. In the black mirror, a woman's trying to erase names. No, she's brushing a boy's hair.
So I'm appreciative of all those who have served and continue to serve, even in times of ambiguous motivations. I'm grateful for those who are willing to and have been willing to do it. My father being one in World War II. So on to tonight's topic and conversation lead here, James Johnson, who I call a dear friend now. I'm grateful to know James. And this is kind of a big deal and brave thing for James to do. It's kind of his first, in a sense, coming out publicly of his tour of, I don't know if we call it tour of duty, sort of in prison, and eager to hear his experiences and the things that he's learned and the things that he can help us understand maybe need to change and the prison system. You can read more about Jameis on my website in the bio area. So I am going to turn it over to Jameis, and you're welcome to ask questions along the way if you would like. And Jameis is fine with that, and we'll have more time for questions after. And then at the end, Jameis will grace us with a lovely song, because again, he is a very good musician and has been for many years. So if you will mute yourself until you're ready to speak, and I can call on, you can raise a hand or whatever, so that we can make sure we give Jameis a good quiet background to speak on, and everybody else who speaks. All right, Jameis.
Well, thank you, Jay, and thank you for having me. You know, we don't have a lot of time in some ways, and so, but there will be time for questions, and and feel free to ask them if you feel compelled to do so. The title of this talk, as Jay wrote it, was "Get Out and Do Your Time," and I had given him editorial discretion, but the original saying, and a saying that I think will come up over and over, is the term "get up and do your time." That's what we occasionally said to each other. And I had one cellmate in particular would, if you're kind of trying to sleep or avoid, or you're not in facing your life and the situations, he would say, "Get up and do your time." And in some ways that still informs me today. I recall that. And so I would urge you all to think about getting up and doing your time as we speak today. I'll let me give you a little bit of background and about my situation. I won't bore you with the details, but it's been a long, arduous experience. I was charged with a white-collar crime many years ago, and I was incarcerated briefly, what we thought was a very short time, and repeatedly engaged in this fight. I was finally committed to prison for an alleged probation violation, and I spent 5 years there. And since that time, I've been consistently fighting my case. The Utah Supreme Court recently ruled on a major aspect of my case, and it also I filed in the process of filing the brief now, and I'm confident I'll prevail, and I hope that my story gets told. There is what I claim huge prosecutorial misconduct, but in some ways that would I think that's happened to many of my friends in prison, and it's my impression. I think there's Amnesty International or the Innocence Project claims that as many as 11 or 12% of the people that are charged, are convicted, are innocent. My impression is it's maybe as high as 20%, but there are at least 75, 80% of the people are over prosecuted. You are facing multiple charges that they very possibly, many can't be sustained. You're facing the possibility that they'll try and impose consecutive sentences instead of letting them run concurrently. And often you just make the bet that the Board of Pardons will show you some leniency. And so I think it's shocking how many people are over prosecuted in this way. There are young people, then there are people who are mentally ill. There are people, a handful that are maybe just very tough guys and deserve some sort of societal punishment. But the thing that happened to me is this all occurred, I think, to some extent, was a great deal of shame. I mean, I was in a big fancy house and fancy neighborhood and a fancy ward with important, fancy people. And I thought I was an important guy, whatever falsehoods one cloaks oneself with. And then you're just crushed. And in my case, we lost everything economically. But I have to say that the people were very strong. They stand by you in a lot of ways, and you don't expect it. My children were all supportive, strong. In many cases, they were prominently involved in various community activities. And yet they stood by me. I think specifically for my youngest son, who has my same name. And anytime he would launch a business or get some award or wrote a paper, my claims about me would come up. And I will just say, I am innocent. I was innocent. And the claims were just, there was a motive, but it was just really aggressive. But I have to say, people stand behind you. People love you, but it still was kind of cloaked in shame. And I remember, just recalling, when I was first in the Fillmore jail, I had work release. It was supposed to be a very short sentence. And I would ride I'm legally blind, I can't drive, but I would let me go out back, get on my bike and ride it a couple miles into town, do my thing. And at 5 o'clock, I'd ride back up and lock my bike, and I would knock on the back door and come in. But I remember I was riding back once, I could listen to a radio, and the song, Tie a Yellow Ribbon Around the Old Oak Tree came on, which I kind of always thought was corny, but it's about, I'm coming home on a train, if you want me to stay, if you want me to come back, tie a yellow ribbon on the old oak tree. It always makes me emotional. And as the song goes, the guy's just, the tree is festooned with ribbons. And I remember I heard the song and I stopped my bike and I just wept. And I remember going home after that, and it was very hard for me to go back to church. I went to sacrament meeting. And I remember a woman said the benediction, and she said, "And Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing Jameis home to us." It was like I was coming up from a mission or something. But I have to say that it was very hard for me to overcome the shame. People love you and support you. But going to prison, in some ways, I have to say, was maybe it's a profoundly rich experience. Despite my anger, despite my bitterness, I have to say, looking back on it, it was profound. And in some ways, I had no idea. People I met there were remarkable. I mean, it's a place of tragedy and cruelty and humor and deep kindness. There are enlightened old souls there. And there are people on the way to that, far more than I was as a Mormon guy. And it's something I try to think of corollary. Some ways I think maybe being in combat or in the middle of a war or being a refugee, but people rise to the occasion. I'll have to look at my notes occasionally, but I'd like to kind of, to tell you just a little bit about the experience, give you a flavor, and I think it'll spark some concerns. And I would like to talk about some reforms I want, but this collective experience in prison produces something. Viktor Frankl in his Man's Search for Meaning, or Alexander Solzhenitsyn in Gul Archipelago, or Boethius in The Consolation of Philosophy, or on and on. You discover things about yourself and about your fellow human beings that you would never learn otherwise. And I will kind of start with just primarily my just prison experience and talk to you about just what's how that emerges. When I first arrived in, I was committed to the Utah State Prison. I was standing in a suit for a judge, and said, "No, I want to commit you to prison." and this was many years after my charges. And you go into a small a holding cell. You get another cellmate. They watch you for about a month and a half, and you're let out for an hour every 24 hours. And then once you're in prison, all of a sudden you meet people you would never met before. I think of a range of people that I met, but I remember the first couple of days I got out at 5:30 in the morning. It was silent. There was only one other person out. It was a young Tongan kid, and I learned that he had just turned 18. He'd been transferred, and he had killed someone when he was 14. And I remember reading in the paper that there was a legal proceeding to sort of get him to a trial or how, and I walked there, and he asked me how I was doing, what did I need, and he got me some shampoo, I remember, and just a quiet act of kindness. I remember when I first got out of prison. I remember the first week I was with someone who was, I thought, a hardened criminal. And I should say, I was in the regular prison population. There is a kind of an open campus for people that are older, or people that are taking classes, or are passive, or been there for good behavior. For 4.5 years, I was never there. I was in Ochre 4. In the last about 6 months, I was transferred. And when like, for example, my first experience, the second day I was with this particular inmate, I was offered cocaine and hooch, which is grapefruit wine. And just really interesting. 2 doors down was a serial killer, Tom Knopfziger. And I remember I was afraid to kind of even ask him over the years what he thought about his crime, but he became my friend in a way I couldn't see. And when you go to use the telephones, often, depending on what gang is there, if you're not affiliated, you don't get a slot on the phone, or you have to wait till it's your time, and you don't want to get the phone if somebody's reserved it. And I remember I was trying to read the note and came all the way across and said, leaned down and said, Jameis, it says this, this and this, just to make sure I was okay and I would know. Another time, saying I was trying to read something, trying to read a scale, and he at the gym, and he just, walked. When I was waking him up and said, "Okay, get on the scale. I will read this to you, but step off and get back on." It's a minor sort of act of kindness that was unexpected. I had speaking of people you don't know, I had another friend, Knowledge, a black man, and he will be there for life unless he can get out of his case. He's from inner city, Philadelphia, and he's there for a murder. I am convinced that he's wrong, and I think that somebody was close to taking his case up. And we worked on his case, but also he was funny and kind to me, and he was a tough guy. And so totally couldn't be more different than me. But he taught me how to walk. He said, "You're not walking right." And I remember we were going to start a business. We were going to, move to Jamaica when he got out. And we're going to start a moped rental business with topless women, riding. I mean, just crazy, but he was my friend. And I miss him. And I wonder how he's going to do. And while I was there, I had this legal education, but you work on your case and others' cases, and that's maybe an interesting window into this and some of the prison reform that's necessary. When I was first there, I met a friend, Ramon Somoza, and I think he may be here tuned in. Ramon was a young man, and I don't think he'll mind me telling you a little bit about his case, but this is a guy who was born in El Salvador and raised in a poor part of LA. He won a scholarship to USC and is very bright. He moved here and was building a real estate business. And he was compelled to fire one of his security guards who was selling drugs in his place, and they met, and he was attacked, and he had a concealed weapon permit. They struggled, and he shot this man. And there's much more to this story, but Ramon was when I met Ramon, he was going to be there for a very, very long time. And I remember at one point Ramon told me, you may be bitter. This may be terribly hard for you. I get that, but for me, it's a great blessing. And in a lot of ways that gave meaning to my experience there and the men I helped and that I'm still helping. And to tell you a little bit about Ramon's story, this is an example of some reforms that are needed, but we were cellmates for a while, but we all lived in Oka 4. Oka 4 could be an interesting place. I ran a prayer circle there for quite a while. They would meet in the cell, and there would be as many as 8 inmates could get in there. That's about all we could get in. And over the years, we had a collection. I remember looking around one time, and there were 5 people there who were there for homicides. But it was a fascinating experience. But Ramon and I started working on our cases. And just to give you an example what goes on, I'm legally blind. I couldn't get any visual aids. You have to hand print all of your pleadings. And I couldn't get enough paper. And I remember we'd steal forms and write on the backs of these forms. And then, you would ask an inmate with good handwriting, and Ramon had great handwriting, to kind of rewrite your stuff. And if you didn't have, you couldn't cut and paste, we would actually paste pages over if we couldn't, get them, if we made a mistake. And then you'd have to get them copied from the contact attorney. But let me give you an example of the research that we had to do. If you're a lawyer, you sit down at a Westlaw or some other computerized research, you type in, you can find the cases you need in probably 3 to 10 minutes. And you can do a broad search, you can go forward and backwards. Where we were, if Ramon wanted a case, I needed a case, we would send to the state law library. We would ask them for a case or a subject matter. They would send us this stuff. It took about 10 days for the cycle. And then you'd look at this, and if it was wrong or you needed another case, you'd send it back and send another request. It would come, you say this costs you 10 days, literally months to do your research. To Ramon's credit, by the way, this guy, he just got out October 11th. And he had the longest motion for new trial in Utah history. And he literally had to stand strongly, ask the judge to insist that he get the research he had in. Judge eventually came to trust him. He cross-examined witnesses. I remember he memorized the general categories of rules of evidence. He could object. One of my sons helped get him an expert witness. And he, through his own effort, through our efforts, won his freedom. When I remember getting out and meeting with his family and his young daughter. So she was just 3 when he went in, I think, and 14 when he came out. But, and during that time, we also helped many other inmates. I remember a couple, but it's arduous to do that kind of work.
James?
Yeah.
Do you want to let Ramon say anything?
Yeah, anytime you want to jump in. And I was going to say, you can't even get the Utah code under which you're charged. You can't get that. They claim that you can have access to the Utah code. It's not there. It's not easy to get. And if you need more information, you literally can't get it. They have a system where they say, well, and Utah is one of the few states that do this. They say, we don't need to give you a law library. The contract attorneys are okay. And the shocking thing is that the contract attorneys, they don't give you what you need. They're not your attorney. And there have been many instances where they give information to the warden. Reginald Williams is another good friend, a Black man in prison, way over his matrix. I talked to him yesterday, but he had a case against the Attorney General's office. They raided his materials. The contract attorney gave his legal pleadings directly to the warden. It's outrageous. That's the kind of thing you have to do for your legal pleadings. You write them by hand. And but I say that, but you got to get up and do your time. And Ramon did that, and I worked on it. But there's also this in the process. There are people just of great humanity, and I wanted to kind of just tell you some stories because they're moving. I taught guitar lessons there while I was there, and I remember some of you who who I taught guitar lessons to will remember that I teach even when you were in high school. I taught "Hang Down Your Head, Tom Dooley." It was one of the first songs. It's only got 2 chords, and there was a fellow, Freddie, and he was a big guy, a lot of muscles. He'd had a heart problem, had a pacemaker, but he was a big guy. Freddie had been a carny. He was there for a murder, and what had happened was he was in a truck with a woman that he knew, and they were both on meth, and she was playing around with a gun, and he tried to get it, and it went off, and she died, and he was charged with this murder. And I'm familiar with more facts of the case. Freddie was there a long time, but not on meth. He was really such a beautiful human being. I remember knowing him, and there was a kindness and a gentleness that came from him. And Freddie wanted to learn to play the guitar, and we could get to the gym, and I could teach him the guitar. The guitars are interesting. You don't have steel strings because you could use those for tattoo needles or some other kind of weapon. You got these nice string guitars. You can't get picks easily, and there's a whole system where the inmates can make you a pick. They work in the greenhouse. They can cut out a bucket piece and then they scrape off the pick on the sidewalk. You're not supposed to do any of this, and they get you a pick. You got a pick. But Freddie learned "Hang Down Your Head, Tom Dooley," and it was the coolest thing he'd ever done. He just loved this. And then they announced the prison talent show. And Freddie wanted to be in the prison talent show. And he wanted me to be in it with him. And I remember that day, he was so, had such jitters. He was so nervous. And we got up in front of the prison. Now we're going to sing "Hang Down Your Head, Tom Dooley." And if you know that song, it's "Hang Down Your Head, Tom Dooley, hang down your head and cry, because poor boy, you're bound to die. You're going to be swinging from the rope." And we started playing this song. And all of the inmates just started singing with such gusto. And when we were done, he's got this rousing applause. And I think it was one of the coolest things, one of the most profound things that had happened to Freddie in his entire life. And it was something. I don't know how to explain that, and the connection with the inmates. And to finish the story, he actually moved. He was transferred. And about 6 months later, I was in the gym, and I got a letter kind of smuggled to me. Someone handed me something. And you're not supposed to write each other. You either have to bounce a letter outside, and it's come in from outside, and you can't use your name. But I got this letter. And so I took it home, and I saw it was from Ramon, of all people, my former cellmate. And he had ended up being a cellmate with Freddie. And I opened it up, and there were some pics in it. And Ramon told me that Freddie had talked a lot about playing the guitar, and he had collected these pics, and about that experience. And then Freddie had a cardiac arrest when he was with Ramon, and Ramon had helped revive him. And he was taken to the hospital, and I think Ramon was able to get them to call some of his fiance, and but he had a do not resuscitate order, and so he died. And I mean, just think about this. And I think about man, the soul of this man, and he was one of those enlightened people that you meet in prison. I think of I mean, I could tell you tales, and Karen knows many of these stories, but I remember just an example. I've talked about using the phones. We talked about nicknames. Nicknames is something in prison. I had all sorts of nicknames. But at one point I had an operation on my ear and I had a big bandage, and so they nicknamed me Nub, and they were offering to donate me an ear. And then and I was called Bacaton, which in Mexican or Spanish, with all the Mexican soccer players, means shiftless. But I remember the story. Ramon and I, there was a young man in the Okafor section, and I can't remember exactly his name, but he was small and young, and he had a kind of a derisive nickname that emphasized his smallness. And I remember we talked about this, and we decided, let's give him a different nickname. So Ramon and I came up with a nickname. I can't even remember exactly what it was. He had a Scottish last name. We started calling him that, just so it would somehow stick, because it changes who you are. I think of Jacob wrestling with an angel and changing his name. And I mean, I could go on and tell you many, many things, but let me also, as we come close to the time, there are some reforms that are really important. And I just want to tell you 3 that are really dear to me, that are really important. One is, in most states, as I've said, most prison systems have the Westlaw research ability, or LexisNexis. You can get in and you can do your own research because nobody's doing it for you. We had prisoners, they were helpless. Young man, I remember, he was going to be there for 2 more years for a violation of parole. He'd been there 2 weeks. It was wrongful. It was an outrageous conflict by the public defender in one of these rural Utah counties. And I helped him write his brief, and he had to memorize it. He had to go on it alone, go to that court in rural Utah. He had to make that argument. And the judge, we rehearsed, and the judge said, I've read your pleading, and this is astounding. We're going to have a hearing on this. And he came back, we rehearsed again, we went back, the case was thrown out, the Board of Pardons had to release him, and he got out. But he would not have been able to get out, if he hadn't gotten up and done his time. And he knew me, which was just the luck of the draw. And yet he had the guts to do this. But there are so many people who are there and can't defend themselves. Ramon is one of the brightest legal minds I know, filed numerous habeas petitions or post-conviction petitions. And we both did together. He did. We had some successes. But they don't have a law library. A lot of the stuff is just concocted, and so one of my reforms for the Utah State penal system is every prison needs to have a law library with a computerized research facility, and they ought to possibly get rid of the contact attorney or clearly disclose that they're not your attorney. It's another reform. It seems simple. They should be able to type and rewrite and cut and paste their legal pleadings so they're legible. They won't be discarded by the clerks at the appellate courts. That's a simple request. It just takes some computers. Let's see what I was. The other thing I was thinking, Ramon and I worked on this, is prison education. Well, we may be running out of time, but and I would just say at the end of this, some of the information on this website, there is a reference to the Utah Prisoner Advocate Network. It's a very good network. A friend of mine is running it. A friend I was in prison with is running it now. But these are things that I want to work on, and in a larger sense, I'm working on some national issues that involve prosecutorial misconduct. But I think my takeaway for you, and be glad to open it up for questions, and I'd also be glad to hear from Ramon, is that these men in prison are remarkable, and there's enormous acts of kindness. These guys many of them are tough, many of them are crazy, but 90% of them are warehoused, and they're fighting for the freedom, and it's a big job, and that we should be involved in. There was a saying I heard once: if you're in prison, I'm in prison. And I feel that way. I still hear from inmates that are my friends and I'm helping. And Ramon is as well. So thank you. There's prison reform, and prison was a remarkable experience. Don't recommend it to everybody, but it was remarkable. If you have questions, feel free to jump in. I know that Joe Binion is here, and oddly, we haven't talked to each other for maybe 50 years. I knew him at BYU when he was a young potter. Thought he was really cool, but he's volunteered at the prisons, and there are many people who do volunteer.
Jameis, let's have Ramon, just before we take questions. Ramon might want to say a few things, and then we can go to some questions. Thank you. Jameis. That was awesome.
Thank you. I'm a little bashful, so I really don't want to say too much, but there are a couple of things that I would like to just say, just real briefly. One is that, and I think I got to start with that one. That's the most important one, and I cannot, I cannot convey just how much I mean this. If it were not for Jameis, had I not met Jameis, I may have never ever got my wrongful conviction overturned, and I may have never ever gotten out of prison, never have gotten a second chance at life. And I've told Jameis that, and I've told him that I am grateful to him for the rest of my life. I mean, whatever he needs, I'm there for him. I got his back, So I'm incredibly grateful to have met and known Jameis, and so I'd like to start with that. And then secondly, regarding criminal reform, I think Jameis hit on some good points right there. And I think one thing that I think is when I watch these conversations about criminal reform, it's always made to seem like it's very complicated. And I think to be able to achieve some significant progress, there's some very simple things that can be done to make just huge improvements. And one of the ones that Jameis just mentioned is being able to provide inmates with a law library. That would make a huge difference. Not everyone who's innocent is going to get their case overturned, because it requires way too much time and dedication and perseverance and heart, and it's incredibly difficult to litigate, from prison, even if we did have a law library. But at least you'd be able to reduce that number. If the number is 20%, right? You'd be able to reduce that to maybe 15%. And that 5%, those are real human lives. It's not just a number. Those are human lives. Somebody's son, somebody's daughter, somebody's father or mother. These are real human lives, that people that are innocent, and some of them could spend the rest of their lives in prison, knowing that they're innocent and there's nothing they can do about it. So I think that there are some real basic things that can be done to make make progress in that direction of just criminal reform, even if it's just, if Utah led the way, I think some of the other states would pick up on this. And but I'm honored and I'm grateful to be part of this conversation. And thank you for the moment that I was allowed to give some thoughts. So thank you.
Thank you, Ramon. Do you have any stories you'd want to share that come to mind?
There's so many. I can tell you that this just to piggyback on a story that James talked about with Robert Ferretti. I met Robert Ferretti, and we eventually became cellmates. And he died. He died on that bed. It was first thing in the morning at 6 a.m. And that story, that experience, that still impacts me so much because, I mean, you know, I panicked. I went down there and to grab the guards and was banging on the door as loud as I could. You know, I didn't care about getting in trouble because I could get in trouble for being so aggressive, you know. But I just, you know, I said, hey, I got my cellie's dying. I need somebody here. And I ran back up and I held his hand as he was dying. I was looking right into his face, just a foot away from his face. And I was talking to him and he was listening to me. And I could, you know, because he was panicking and I was asking him because I didn't know what was wrong with him. And I was asking him to breathe slowly and to calm down. And it was amazing just looking to his eyes. And I could still see that look in his eyes. And after, you know, I happened to be reading my Bible, you know, when all this happened, because that was a habit that I picked up every morning to read the Bible. And when they escorted me out of the room to put me kind of in a secluded room, I couldn't help it. It was all just seemed like it was, I broke down and I'm not one to cry quickly. And I did. I broke down and you know, I by myself just sat there holding the Bible and the verse that I was reading was exactly like relevant to what was going on. And I thought he had died. I later found out they brought him back to life and he was able to, at the hospital, at least say goodbye to his family, to his fiance who had been waiting, was kind of, had been, you know, engaged to him for a couple of years and he died shortly thereafter. But yeah, it's still a very impactful experience. It was an amazing experience. And yeah, he was a good dude. He, you know, I don't know who he was before he came to prison and, you know, and all the circumstances pertaining to that, you know, that incident that led to him getting convicted. But I know that the person that I met was a gentle soul. There was a lot of wisdom there. He was a good dude. He was a good dude.
Ramon, I remember just years ago living with you, and we had piles of legal materials and we had 500 cases all shoved on our bed. And I remember one time I got called and they told me, it's like, you have this paper. I remember your papers, writing them up. You make a mistake, you'd take a razor blade that maybe you shouldn't have, but nobody cared because they trusted you. And you would cut out a whiteout. And then one day that razor blade actually fell into an envelope that was going to the judge. And all of a sudden they came and got me. And they raided your cell. They talked to you. What are you doing? And it's in the papers that you know, the prosecutor was there with his hair waving in the wind. You know, I'm not going to let these inmates threaten the judge. And the judge said, look, would you just take this somewhere else? I want to finish this case. And it was just interesting. But I remember we both got raided. They had everybody go down and get ready. And then what they do this, they search everybody's cells for knives or needles or anything. But if we all look back and they said, hey, since you and Somoza, you're getting your cell torn up. Somehow they thought we had a cell phone or our emails were going out. They just ransacked our place. But I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, we had many experiences together, you know.
Here's another question for you. I have a friend who recently discovered a really hard injustice that he's trying to get past, that he feels like completely changed the course of his life and lost some important time in his life, a big chunk. That sounds somewhat similar to what you both experienced, Ramon, even more time for you. How have you been able to manage that and not have that be a daily burden of, you know, anger and frustration and regret of what was missed? You know, again, I think of you, Ramon, because I have a friend who missed his children's growing up because he was in prison. How do you manage that?
That's a difficult question. It's one that I've, that I've wrestled with for a long time, because even before I got my case overturned, I was feeling confident that it would eventually be overturned because of people like Jameis. And I eventually just developed this discipline that I knew that I couldn't lose, I just was so disciplined, so determined, and my work ethic was amazing. But to answer your question, I have a few different ways of looking at it. One of them is that and it's the easier ways, right? I've like I said, I have a few different ways of looking at it, but one of them is that I think it's just it was destiny. It was something that was supposed to happen. I've learned a great deal from it, not just about like myself. That was the biggest one, about myself, but also about life, about the criminal justice system, about people, about the kind of the incorrect stereotypes and beliefs that we have about people that are in prison. Because prior to this, I had never been in trouble before. I graduated from USC at the top of my class, and I had a very negative view of people that were incarcerated. And this was an eye opener. And I plan to do some good things with it. Initially, one of the things that James and I have been talking about is and I'm already going into that field. I will become a paralegal. I am a paralegal at this point. I have a certificate, and I've already started a paralegal business. And James and I are talking about starting a law firm and helping out inmates. So I think there's a lot of good that'll come from it. I think that the losses are I mean, they're just huge. I mean, you can't there's no doubt dollar value to some of the losses, that some of the time, the relationships that I lost, so it's but I don't I forgot who I told this to, and I know who it was. It's my former attorney. The last one that represented me right at the end. And I told them that I am actually looking forward to the day when, and I hope it'll be soon, when I'll take the prosecutor out for lunch, the prosecutor that prosecuted me that did this. And he couldn't believe it. He just was laughing. He could believe that I was being serious about it, but he couldn't believe that those words were coming out of my mouth after all the suffering and all the loss. And I just just to end it with this, there's more to this, but just to end it with this, I've worked hard to be an optimist. I worked hard to be an optimist ever since I was like 18 or 19, and listening to Tony Robbins and Jim Rohn and all these guys. And one of the lessons that I learned is that I got to let go of whatever doesn't serve me. And going forward, I still got at least another 30 years of life. Maybe if I eat healthy, maybe another 40 or 50. Which I am eating healthy, and I'm watching all that. But that doesn't serve me. To hold on to that anger and that resentment doesn't serve me. It doesn't do me any good. If I change my perspective on it, I can do so much good with it. And I'm choosing to take that approach. I'm making a choice to take that perspective, of this whole experience and life and everything. So,
Thank you, Ramon, very much. Thank you. James, did you have anything to add on that question?
No, I struggle with that. I have some bitterness, and as I told you, Ramon's statement to me made prison meaningful in a lot of ways. Even dealing with the shame as I came out, I had to learn, and with the help of Karen, my fiance, who you can't see, but to own it. It is what it is, and that was a big step. And I don't know if I'll stop. I've got to let go of some of the bitterness, but what's helping me is just continue to prevail and help to get a recovery from the state. But indeed, several people have made this observation: when am I going to move on? And I'm ready to move on. I want to finish this litigation, but I think with the love of your family. The other thing that I do remember, and I have to say, when I look back on those 5 years in prison, I can't deny that they were some of the most profound experiences I've had in my life. And in that way, it's very rich. But I think we all have things to get past, whether it's prison or wrong. And maybe that's why I'm Christian. I just will tell you a quick story. There was a fellow in prison that both Ramon and I knew, kid named Bully. And he was a giant Tongan kid. And he had TCG across his chest, tattooed across his chest, Tongan Crip Game. And for some reason, and he was there for a murder as a teenager. It's about 28. For some reason, Bully and I became really close, inexplicable. But I was estranged from my younger brother, who was a lawyer, had been for many years. And I was starting to work through this because, if I believed I was Christian, I needed to learn to forgive. And I started trying to write this letter, and Bully knew. And Bully insisted that I write this letter. And at one point, I was on this table, this metal table, writing it, and he read it, and he would say, no, you got to say this. And this Tongan Crip gang leader, this giant, saw that I overcame the estrangement with my brother in prison. And that's, I guess, what you got to do. You got to get up into your time and deal with life and go forward.
That's beautiful. I so appreciate now your get up and do your time. I didn't understand that before now, so that's really good. Dan, you had a question? Dan Eastman? You're still on mute.
Yeah, Charlene Durham had a question too in the chat, but my question was about how you get back on your feet after you've been in prison. And are there reforms for our parole system that we ought to consider?
Well, the two things, transition. I was on a group consulting with the Board of Pardons. It was the Disability Law Center, the ACLU, and a group I was involved in. And my concern was the impossibility of transition. I mean, time after time, we'd say goodbye to men, and they would be back in 3 months. I remember a kid, we call him Corpse, and it's so lovable. They're a serious drug problem. And I remember, just as an aside, that he always said how much he disliked Mormons. And one time he had been locked in, and I was going to get some coffee. And he said, Johnson, can you give me some coffee? So I got him this big cup of coffee, and I went over and said, okay, Corpse, you got to say, I love Mormons. He just twisted and I said, okay, I love Mormons. But Corpse is telling me, he's saying, look, listen, I'm getting out. I said, what are we going to do? I said, I'm going to go to the homeless shelter, but I know where I can make one sale, and this will set me up. I'll get into an apartment. I saw him 3 months later, and it's terrible to transition support. I got out. I had family. I couldn't get into an apartment for a while because I was a criminal, but I had family, and I had kids that are, involved. When you get out, you don't have a cell phone. You don't have a way to check any resources. You don't have bus transportation money. If you do, you don't have a cell phone to look on the bus route. Ramon just went through this. You've got to get a driver's license. You've got to go to workforce services. And I think they're doing a better job. We developed a list of, when I was working with the Board of Pardons, this comprehensive sort of telephone contact list, but a lot of people didn't have support. I got out, I remember there was a 7-Eleven near my son's place in Sugar House, kind of a seedy place, but I was there at the time. And I saw a guy that I hadn't known in prison. He was a likable guy. And he had his backpack on. He had a sweatshirt on. It's good to see each other. We're kind of speaking in low terms. He was clearly homeless. And I gave him some dough. I don't know how he's going to make it. So that is one thing. The transition services, they're improving. It's so vital. Then the parole services, it's an outrage. It needs to be redone. Somoza and I were both talking about a kid named Patrick. He got out, he had some credit card fraud. He sent back a letter with some girly pictures. They were, I guess, acceptable girly pictures. But he used not his name. It became clear that it was him. Probation extradited him from another state, sent him back to prison, and he's got like some long term. Now that he shouldn't have done this. It's outrageous. But there are other solutions. That's just outrageous. And I mean, one solution, I think that in the federal system, the probation services are run by the U.S. Marshal. They're not run by the executives, the prosecution, the U.S. attorney. There is a U.S. Marshal section that works for the judge. And when the judge says, I want a probation report, or when you're on probation, the judiciary is controlling that. In Utah, when the judge wants a probation report, it's the prosecutors are working with the probation guys, and if they don't like you, they will produce a report that will be shocking. And in my case, I kept having fight back alleged probation violations, and one is eventually stuck. But so that's a big change. There's also some revision to the Board of Pardons. Maybe Ramon could speak to that. It's getting better. The Utah Prison Advocate Network, we were at, basically the Board of Pardons was filled with former prosecutors. It's just outrageous. Slowly, we have gotten some more defense-oriented and objective kind of attorneys and others, citizens sitting on that board. It's a much better board. I also think the legislature for a long time was just appointing prosecutors and to be into the judiciary, and that's an unbelievable mistake. And a judge, in really many ways, is the last thing standing between you and the prosecution, and your freedom. And the selection of judges is an issue that's also being worked on. Those are some of my thoughts about those two issues: transition and probation.
Thank you, Jameis. Charlene, do you want to ask the question yourself rather than me read it? I'm not sure. Jameis won't be able to probably read it.
For sure.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your candor and sharing and the service you've provided to others. I really have lots of questions, but the two, as you talk a lot about the prosecutors, not only in overreach with the prosecutions, but then being a part of the parole board, is there any recourse or any way that they can be held accountable for making other people's lives miserable when it's really not necessary?
Ramon, you want to talk about that?
The only thing that comes to mind immediately, and this might not be the best answer, but the one thing that comes to mind immediately would be, so for example, in Utah County, right, you have, I can't remember his name right now, but he's the attorney that's in charge of the prosecution's office, right, here in Utah County. And he's elected, right? I would think that one idea would be to put people in that position that are aware of these concerns, that are going to actually take steps to see that their prosecutors are not overzealous, that there isn't any malicious prosecution like there was with Jameis. So I would say that, and exposing them too, because I think that if all you do is watch the news, which, in prison, we watch the news a lot. In there, we realize just how biased it is and how the public doesn't really get the whole story on a number of things that where we know the truth.
Yeah, there is what? There is a what's the name of the prosecutorial, the conviction review?
Conviction Integrity Unit.
Yeah, the Conviction Integrity Unit, and that is sprung up and many of the counties have implemented this. There's a way to look at your conviction. It's a board mostly of citizens. And David David Levitt is the Utah County District Attorney, the governor's younger brother. And I've heard varying things that I was talking to someone recently about a particular case, and they were dismayed that he didn't seem to be taking this aggressively. And the Attorney General has also enacted a provision for that. And the statute says that you can go outside of the county if you don't think you'll get a fair shake. So in my case, I was in 4th District, and I have a criticism of judge and some of the prosecutors there. And so I wouldn't go to the conviction integrity unit in Utah County, but I could go to the one in Salt Lake County. But that is an important provision. There are also this body of law for prosecutorial vindictiveness, but there is something called the Sovereign Immunity Act. And the prosecution right now is really cloaked in astounding immunity, the police, the executive branch. Some of that's being reduced. I would also say that there are grandma laws like the Freedom of Information laws, the Government Management, Records Act. And Ramon used that really well to get the records of an expert witness that had lied about his testimony in Moses' case. But you can send for this information and learn about the history of the prosecutors. And the Sovereign Immunity Act needs to be tweaked a bit. Prosecutors, and there is a notion, and I'm proud to say that our 2 senators, I'm happy to say, whether you agree with them particularly or not, they seem to be committed to prison reform and to civil liberties. So that's headed in the right direction. But there is a concern with prosecutorial discretion. And Ramon's case went 5 years easily too long when a prosecutor said, okay, I'm looking at your cases, and refusal to negotiate in good faith. But so yeah, really a lot of the reforms need to focus on the prosecution. And there are a couple of national organizations involved in prosecutorial misconduct. And it's shocking. I mean, I think of blackjack in my one section when I was in Orca 5. There were 2 jacks, and one was black, so we call him Blackjack. Blackjack was a gentleman. He'd come here from a Head Start program, and he wasn't well educated. He was wrongly accused, and he was trying to figure out how to help him. And it turned out that he was illiterate, and he would come to me, and I'd help him read his letters from a girlfriend who was really supportive. And he would also, I had, at the last few months, I got a word processor. I've been making ADA demands, and I was the only one that had one. And I would he'd have me type up his letters. So and then he would, because you can't send out typed letters, and then he would print them by hand from the typed version. And I remember we sent out grammar requests to start getting this case. He did have a public defender in the Salt Lake Public Defender's office. Their appellate group is excellent, and it's mostly women. They're brilliant. And I'm proud to say that my youngest daughter is now a public defender. But he had that help, but there was so much going on, and he was over prosecuted, zealously over prosecuted. And I worry about him. I don't know how this gentle, wrongly accused, illiterate, kind man will fully be able to vindicate his rights. That's another reform, as Ramon points out. If there were access to a volunteer legal group, after you're convicted, all of your representation just drops off. And that is another another necessary element. There needs to be ongoing, permanent, continued ability to review cases and ask legal questions. And so that's another suggestion. It's another thought.
Thanks, Jameis. Stephen, before I go to you, I am curious, Suzanne, is that you, Suzanne Stott? Do you have any thoughts from your experiences? If you're there, I see your name. Have you unmuted? Maybe she stepped away. Suzanne has some experience too with.
No, this is too, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
No, it's too exhaustive to talk about tonight. In fact, as I've been listening, I'm writing one of my son's attorneys giving a history of his life that may impact the judge to give him a leaner sentence on November 30th, because he's been in since March of 2020 for a minor parole violation and may face 70 months more for it. So this is not worth talking about tonight. It's too exhaustive and depressing and horrible. But thank you. I think racism.
Suzanne, good luck. Hang in there and work on this. And all I can say is don't give up.
But Jameis, when we were at the last trial, 20 years ago, he committed a violent crime, hasn't since, but has had to go back for parole violations. And I'm speaking as a mother, but not really. I'm an adoptive mother that adopted him as a teenager, so I'm pretty objective. And it's very obvious that the gang unit has profiled him. I saw right on the screen when they were showing the case and showing that he was followed a mile and a half down Redwood Road, and they picked him up for not signaling for 3 seconds.
Oh, yeah, clearly they clearly.
It's racial profiling.
And the gang unit, I helped.
Okay, so on his thing, Jameis was known gang member.
Right. And
he hasn't been a gang member for 20 years.
I've helped a young man get out from under that designation. It changes everything. If you can get out from under that designation, that's huge. And it's not impossible. But that is something that you might want to think about changing. I was in a federal, part of my proceedings in a federal trial, and we had to go back for jury instruction in front of a federal judge with the U.S. attorney. And several jurors were asked, they had problems. And juror after juror came in and said, listen, I have a son that was incarcerated and it was just wildly overwrought, or I had experience with prosecution and I don't trust them. I don't know if I can be fair. And the judge remarked, and he's heard this over and over, and he said, it is concerning that there is so much distrust with the prosecution, in this case, his attorney, among the jurors. And I've seen this over and over again. And mothers, same experience you've had. I don't know, Ramon, if you want to give her your name, but I don't know that I have the skills, but work on that gang affiliation. Have it rolled back if you can.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Thanks, Jay.
God luck.
Thanks, Suzanne. Okay, let's see. We got Walter. Did you want to share? Are you still here? Where'd you go?
Yeah, I'm here.
There you are. Did you want to share that?
My son, while he was at Salt Lake Community College, we did, had to do some service, and we did, and he started going to a letter writing to inmates program. And that just connected me. I'd actually met someone at my Quaker meeting that was a professor at Salt Lake Community College, and I put some of that in the chat. So there's a link. So if anyone wants to kind of see their names and click on it. But so I know there's some really good programs or efforts being made, and it's an uphill battle to do that. But I've recently been contacted by Dr. Anthony Nicella about doing a program like a alternatives violence program and trying to get that started in Utah. And they have a great history that kind of where inmates reached out to a Quaker community and said, like, will you help us here? So we have kind of a liaison. So there are some really good programs. I just want to, for anyone that's interested in like how you can get involved. And I love what you're doing, because the innocent people, I think, need that. But also when you see God in everyone, that kind of changes you, and you say, like, you know, how can we have a better way for people to transition out of it? And it just seems like it's a terrible way that we transition people. And that doesn't change unless we attend stuff and share stories. And I just think that's so brave of you, Jameis, and Ramon, and it's great to hear your stories. And the other events that I've been to have been wonderful to hear those stories. So I hope that your example I hope that you keep doing that, and that your example helps others, because I think we need to hear those stories to really change.
Let me throw
Thank
out a pitch for the Utah Prisoner Education Project. Was that what it's called, Ramon? My swing band, we played at a fundraising for them, but it's a great program. And also I noticed in transition, I think Mormon Church is doing a good job in helping people find, regardless of religion, finding transitional housing, clothing, and employment. So, and there are some efforts like that. But I think that communicating, writing with the prisoner is beautiful.
Hey, you mentioned the LDS Church helping. So there was a question, I don't know if it was Charlene, someone asked if it is helpful that they have church meetings in prison, or if that feels condescending to prisoners. Some question like that.
I guess Ramon is not Mormon. I didn't find a lot of meaning in church attendance, but in Okafor, we could only go once a month because there's somebody had knifed somebody at church a few years before I got there. But the bishop there, I had a lot of deep religious experiences in the framework of Mormonism. But a lot of people came. They're very good. There was a family home meeting program. A lot of inmates, regardless of their affiliation, could go on Monday night, and they found that really meaningful. And but there are presence there, and I think it is helpful. And there are other religions there. I remember getting a crucifix. I went with a friend to a Catholic event. So I think they're doing a good job at church. You can't take the sacrament there in church. But I think it is a comfort. A lot of people go. And I think their presence is good there.
Okay, thank you. Stephen Parkin, you still want to ask one of those questions real quick? Or do you want me to read it?
Yeah, thanks, Jay. I'm here.
Okay.
My readers can see I've got 2 or 3 questions there in the chat line. And my questions and thoughts have changed, evolved since I've heard some very good comments from others, namely Suzanne and her comments, and Walter as well. Kind of a stream of consciousness that's coming to me right now is I wish that we would spend much of the money that's spent on the courts and on attorneys and prosecution. I wish some of that money, or much of the money, would be spent on assisting and on rehabilitation. I mentioned in one of my comments rather, that some countries use the prison system in their country as more of a school or a rehabilitation center with a library and with employment training And the only thing that sets it apart as a prison is there's a fence around it. And I wish that we would spend more of our money in assisting the transition of people. I work with property management here in the greater Salt Lake area, and I'm often getting requests from transitioning people who had a little bit of mischief in their past, but have now corrected that. And they just find it so hard to get housing. On top of the difficulty of housing among the larger population, as we're well aware in the greater Salt Lake area, with the costs going up. And I just feel like they're getting buried under the difficulty of that task, getting employment, proving where they've been or why they were in prison to a new prospective employer, persuading a new landlord to let them rent from them. It's just so difficult for them. And the temptation exists there to, I suppose, for some, to reoffend. And, as I drive around the greater community, I see so many help wanted signs, restaurants, fast food, various service organizations need employees, entry-level employees. And there's got to be a way to help these people who are now coming out of the prison system at all levels of offense to secure some of these jobs and to make their way in the world, and to spend all this money that the courts are now consuming through attorneys and et cetera to redirect that money to a better cause. Any comments on that?
Ramon? You're absolutely right that we don't fund this population, and it leads to recidivism, and it's a matter of budget, and even the parole effort could be reformed to be supportive, helping people succeed. It's a problem. Housing, as you say, is a big problem. Well, Ramon, you just went through this process, and Ramon has a family parents that he can live with. And if you don't have that, one of the programs that we were kind of kicking around was a mentor, a transition helper, not part of the organization, but someone who you had experience, could get people, kind of like a social worker, but not volunteer. So you could get guidance, and you could be directed to sources. There are some transitional employers. There's the Other Side Academy. When I moved here, we hired them to move all of my furniture in here. And we were told in advance, hide your medications. But they did a heck of a job, and it was a great work. And they were remarkable. And there needs to be other programs like that. You're absolutely right. And they need to be funded not only by the government, but there is a lot of volunteer work that could go forward in that regard.
Thank you both. Hey, Joe, I would like to make sure we hear from you and your thoughts and experiences on this subject, because we're getting short on time.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. Actually, I've been volunteering for 27 years. I'm what you could call an old number. And probably, well, it was back in late 2005, the warden called me into his office and said, Bugs is getting out in 6 months. Bugs was that was his prison handle. His name is Craig Marvell. I don't know if either of you guys knew him. I don't know. Jameis, when were you in?
From 2012 to 2017.
Okay, he offended, he fell back in the 70s. In fact, he was on the same block with Gary Gilmore, and he was on death row. And there was some prosecutorial misconduct for sure in his case, because he was able to get a stay and change his sentencing from the death penalty to life. And after 31 years, he got out, and the warden called me in and he said, Marvell is getting out and he's paroling to your town. And you and I both know he's no threat to anyone but himself. And he asked me to mentor him. And so I got to do that, which is a very unusual situation. Wow. Because I'm not to have anything to do with them when they get out until they're off paper. But the warden said, I'm waiving that, and I want you to shadow him. I want you to make sure he doesn't fall through the cracks. And it's a huge education for me about just how difficult it is to hit the street with no support. I was able to find him a very cheap apartment. Actually, it was a log cabin in our little town. I ran into a guy at a high priest dinner and said he had a job for him. Another guy in my ward put up some money to help him get a car. I helped him get a driver's license. I mean, he was Rip Van Winkle, 31 years off the street and then coming back in another century. He only lived for 10 months. I think part of the reason he was able to get love from the board was because he was dying of liver cancer. And I think medical knew it, but he didn't know it. But at any rate, it really opened my eyes. And of course, very few people parole to my community. I asked the guys, when they're getting short, I'll ask them, what are your plans? What are you doing? And I try to give them advice based on what I learned working with bugs for 10 months. If I lived in this, well, my problem is my calling is on the inside. And so I can't really work with guys on the outside, except for this special case where the warden asked me to do it. But it was a real education on how hard it is to hit the street and come up with a phone, a ride, a job, an apartment, and having been completely managed for decades as a ward of the state. Anyway, yeah, I'd really like to check into what David Bokovoy is talking about in this article that Walter referenced, because there needs to be a follow through after they get out. And
Exactly.
I know enough guys who have been on parole that some parole officers are really quite decent, and some are bound and determined to see you fall and go back.
Exactly, yeah, and it's so arbitrary.
When Marvell was getting ready to get out, I met with his parole officer, and he said, Joe, we're having this great conversation. I'm a really nice guy, but when you see me again, I will be an asshole, and that's my job. Because if he's going to go off, he needs to go off on me, not on someone in the public. And that's the mentality of the probation and parole system, is we've got to break them before they break somebody. At least that's the sense I've gotten from some of the guys that I've had contact with.
No, you're exactly right. It's astounding.
I will also comment on something you've kind of indicated, Jameis, and that is, these are remarkable people. My inmate brothers are the most important teachers of my life. I don't know what I thought when I went in '94, but I found out right away that to just shut up and listen was the best course, because I don't have a lot of advice to give. These are remarkable people.
Joe, what do you do in the prison?
I work with the indigenous population, the sweat lodge, pipe ceremony. I served an Indian mission in Canada in another lifetime, right about the time I was probably meeting Jameis. Maybe a little, okay, yeah, 50 years ago, that was 71. But I just, by things lined up, the door opened and I was ushered into the sweat lodge area, and I've been there for 27 years. I grow tobacco. In fact, earlier while we were starting this, I was rolling cigarettes because I go in tomorrow morning and I take about 28 prayer sticks, we call them, and the native inmates pray with tobacco. They do get their sacrament in prison, and it's tobacco, and it makes for a very popular program. But the circle I work with are pretty good about weeding out the guys that aren't there for the right reasons. They know the level of sincerity. They have very, very keenly tuned BS detectors. But I'm still active LDS in my ward, but I believe very much that any way that anyone wants to pray is just fine with God. They don't care. They just want to hear from you.
Amen. Amen. Do you have any story you want to share that was meaningful to you while you've served in prison?
Oh my gosh. There's no time. I've had so many things happen that have really changed my life. Watching men having things come to me as strokes of inspiration, just like when I was serving as a missionary, just like when I've served in church. I'm quite clear that God walks amongst that population and speaks through them and speaks to them. And I remember sitting down with a man who I had known on the outside and had fallen pretty far and pretty hard. And he talked to me about going off on God and cussing him out and having a transformative experience in the process of that. And I will just say that God's not real fussy about the tone of our voice or the language we use or the form that we approach, but prayer is important. And if you're yelling at God, you're praying at least.
I love that.
And there's nothing you'll ever do that will make you unwelcome to call on God. Nothing. They want to hear from you.
Beautiful. And thanks for saying they. Appreciate that.
It's mom and dad.
I like that. Thank you. Well, it's 9:00, folks. Jameis, Ramon, anything else you want to close up with? Any last comments? Can't hear you, Ramon.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
For me, I just wanted to thank everybody, and thank you, and thank Jameis and everybody just for this opportunity to be part of this. So thank you.
Thank you so much for being willing to share. Come here. Thank you. I hope to see you again.
Yeah, thank you. You will.
Great. Jameis?
I loved what you said, Joe, about mentorship. And I guess what I would urge that comes out of it is, as you said, Joe, these are remarkable men. They're divine, like all of us. And just be ready to help and support all of these things we've raised. And I good luck to those of you who are fighting this right now. Our hearts are with you. And thank you for letting me speak and for listening to me.
Oh, it's been wonderful. You've done a wonderful job, Jameis. Grateful to you being willing to do so and share. And you too, Ramon and Joe and everybody else. Thank you. Jameis, were you gonna do a little number to close us out?
I was sure. I
Um,
was thinking.
yeah,
What?
Go ahead. I was just gonna say, Jameis did offer, if some of you want to chat a little more after this is officially over, he said he's willing to stay on a little bit. So is that still true, Jameis?
Sure. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm glad.
Okay.
was thinking, this is for Freddie. It's a rendition of Hang Down Your Head, Tom Bueller. And, thank you.
It's a lot prettier than I'm used to hearing that first song. Thank you so much, everyone. Till next time. So we've got some good stuff for December. Got a Jesus kind of among the landscape. This will be a environmental professor that talks about Jesus and nature and art. I've asked Andy Pitcher Davis. She's got an artist. They've done a lot of beautiful woodcuts, particularly southern Utah and churches. So it'll be a different kind of Christmas thinking and celebration, but I'm excited. So hopefully you'll join us for that. And then, as you saw on the website in January, we've got a friend David Osler. He's been involved in a national group called Three Circles, and he's developed it for particularly for LDS folks to talk about difficult things like faith transitions, political differences, things of that nature. And so he'll talk about his work on that he's been building. He's invested a lot of time and actually money to try to build this. So that will be good too. So I hope to see you all again. I appreciate you being willing to share the time and space. And then you're welcome to stay with us and talk a little bit longer with whoever wants to hang out. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Karen's getting back in the picture. I don't see, it seems like, did Helen and Scott leave? I don't know what their handle is, but I think they were there. Helen is Karen's, James's fiance's twin sister. And I mean, twin. Very much so. Anybody have anything? Go ahead, James.
No, we've enjoyed getting to know you, and I've enjoyed these gatherings over the year too. I'm so glad you did this Prism Reform thing. I mean, you know, that really gives a way to vent. And I was going to say, I wanted to say, I think, was it Ms. Stott or Shirlene Durham, that I think one of them, if they wanted further advice, I mean, I'd be glad to just, or some thinking, I'd be glad to get them an email if they wanted.
Thank you. I can mention that to Suzanne. You know, she's a remarkable person. She's adopted 10 to 12. I think they're all Black, most of them handicapped kids at different ages.
Wow.
And she's a single mom. I mean, she didn't start out single when she started that, but yeah, she also helped start Wednesday's Child. She's mentored Cambodian refugees, and there might have been another group before that. Now I can't remember. And then now I got to know her. Well, we actually met when we adopted our daughter years ago, but I actually got to know her, my wife Jane and I, when we were serving in the African refugee branch which I still am, the LDS Orleans Creek branch, because she's been there for years and is like, I don't know how that branch would run without her. It's just, and the other cool thing for her claim to fame is she actually marched with Martin Luther King once years ago. So,
Oh, wow.
and Jameis, she's a musician. She was in many bands and a singer and guitar player back in the day.
You'll have to have her over to a sing-along, or we'll have to have all of us over to.
Yeah, I would love that. She's just so darn busy being Saint Suzanne out there. Seriously, she's she's a force to be reckoned with. But she's had some really painful, hard experiences with some of her kids in prison, and particularly because they're Black, they get profiled and
Yeah.
hard.
Ramon was just telling me that a friend of ours in prison, big Black fellow, I think he could bench press more than anybody, Tracy Smith. He got out, and I had not heard that. And that was wonderful to hear. He'd been there for, 25 years or more. But it's interesting. Another aspect of being in prison in Utah is you get to know all sorts of people that you would never, have the chance to cross paths with, and develop a lot more empathy for those people who are getting profiled. It's a real thing.
Yeah, it is. I've had some experience with, one of them was a foster kid. There's actually a couple foster kids that ended up in prison that I kind of mentored when they weren't in prison, when they were young men in my area, because we had some friends that were foster parents. And then another one that I met through actually home teaching. He was dating this gal that I home taught in this family. And anyway, and that guy, he's back in prison again. He got out. He was involved in gangs. He's an young Italian kid, just very lovable guy. And he had reached out to me. So we were riding in prison and talking on the phone. And he was so upbeat and optimistic. And he'd found an apartment, and he'd been trained as a chef in prison and also as a personal trainer. So they'd actually, he had a lot of opportunities and used them. And then when I tried to connect with him when he got out, we had like one phone call, and it's like he kind of cut me out of the picture. And then 3 months later, I talked to his brother, and he's back in prison. So I don't know what happened there. It was so disappointing, because I had such high hopes and expectations. I don't know if the gang got it, I don't know, but it was just heartbreaking, because it looked like he was going to, and that was like his second or third time in prison. It looked like he was going to actually break that cycle. And
yeah, it's
I don't know what happened.
10% battery.
You disappeared, but you're still here. You can talk. We can hear you.
It says there was 10% battery remaining.
Aha.
We'll be okay.
Well, can I just say something?
Yeah.
I don't know how many, let me see. Let me get the participant screen, because I don't know how many people are still on. What does it say?
There is eight
Okay.
people on.
All right. Well, one thing that has struck me during the, I don't know, like 20 months that I've known Jameis is how whenever he talks about the guys he met in prison, that's how he talks to them. He doesn't refer to them as fellow inmates or prisoners or criminals or anything like that. He says the guys I met in prison. And I'm continually struck by the respect and compassion and love that he shows, and what the stories reveal about what happens in prison. Because if all you get is what you see in the movies, then you get the idea. Well, I used to correspond with somebody in prison once, and he said, "You show any weakness, and you cannot show any weakness. You can't cry or anything like that." But then when I hear Jameis's stories, I hear so many acts of gentleness and kindness. And I know that it's good to know that happens, but on the outside, you don't know what it's like on the inside. And I just have this feeling that, that Jameis, there's something special about you that also allows people to be human around you. And I was wondering if you would tell us that story about the poker game.
Oh, I just remember, I remember just lying in a bunk, and I'd come to know just this young man. I say young, maybe he was close to 40, he might have been 35, 40. Cheerful. I think he was a twin, a fraternal twin with a sister, but good guy and cheerful. But I remember they were playing, I'm not sure if it was poker or cards, hearts or whatever, but they were in the break room and I was just listening. And I remember someone said, that was so stupid, you know, I guess what he did. And I heard him say, everybody calls me stupid. I'm not stupid. But he started crying. He went and walked the length of the dorm and lay on the top bunk, kind of facing the wall. And I remember just thinking, you're not stupid or something. I just remember feeling, I don't know, I just went up to him and he was kind of crying. I just wanted to tell him, you're a great guy. You're not stupid. And I remember just thinking about that and loving this. Yeah. It just surprised me how, I just was filled with empathy for him. And he was just a good person, but you just see how somehow this triggered him, and it was something that was really deep within him. And all you could do was, you know, love him. And I reached out and I remember touching his back. But he had been very kind to me. It was just, he was happy and joyful, and it was just a moment. And I guess as I told the story to Karen, it was surprising because there's kindness in prison, and there's violence, but there's also there's a great human kindness.
It's good to know. It's important to know. Thank you, Karen, for, I agree with your assessment of Jameis too. That's what I found since knowing him. So thank you for prompting that story. Joe, anything else you want to say? We should give you a whole Faith Again or something to talk about your experiences.
Indeed.
I don't know. I didn't see it coming. I mean, the whole involvement with prison, it just, the door opened, and it's definitely been my school. Yeah, I don't know if I would be able to say that I know Jesus had I not come into that association.
Interesting.
Indeed.
I think there is there's that Buddhist saying or teaching that when the student is ready, the door opens, and it just fell together. It was not something that I saw coming. In fact, when the Gunnison facility was still being built, the warden would stop by my pottery shop on his way down to Gunnison to supervise the building of this facility. And he was after me to come in and start a pottery program. And I no way do I want to do that. It just wasn't interesting to me. And, you know, things change. And a man came into my life who invited me to come with him into the prison and help with the sweat lodge, and just happened, you know. And I'm grateful. I look forward to tomorrow morning getting up and getting down there and spending a couple of hours in prayer and in conversation with these guys. And the group is very diverse. And there's a lot of Native American guys. There's we always have 2 or 3 black fellas showing up who are also native. And then we have a chunk of islanders, Tongans. It's the only place where Tongans and Samoas sit together.
Yeah.
On the street, I think they're too busy trying to whack each other, but in rival gangs. But in there, they are Usos, they are brothers, and they hang together. And well, anyway,
Hmm.
it's been an interesting development in my life. And,
What are these prayers like? Are they offering the prayers, or what? Are they different each time, or?
yeah, you figure out right away who grew up on the reservation and who grew up in Sunday school.
I'm gonna be losing you shortly, guys. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you so much, Jameis and Karen. Thanks for helping him out on the technology end. Sure appreciate you. Thank you.
Jameis, how am I going to find you?
Ask Jay. I'd
Yeah.
love to see you.
Yeah, I've only known one person in my life named Jameis, and that was you.
I've taken a psychology class from your uncle.
Oh gosh. Bob was why
Good.
I
Amazing.
took an interest in native stuff. He served his LDS mission with the Zuni, Hopi, and Dene.
Wow.
And that's all I wanted in my life, was to go on an Indian mission. And I guess the gods sent me to Canada, and I spent my mission with the Iroquois and Chippewa people. And anyway, yeah, Bob was great.
Reach out. I'd love to get together.
Good stuff.
I can find you through Jay
Yeah, I'll connect you. Happy to.
or Thomas.
Yeah, true. Thomas, Sue. Yeah, how you doing?
Okay.
Thanks for doing this, Jay.
Hey, thank you, everyone.
Hey,
Thanks for being a part. If you're not here, then it's not much of a conversation. So thanks for being here, everybody. Good night.
Bye,
Good night.
Take care.